there on the screen. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We are just getting started, but before we do, could you change your name here on Zoom so it includes your name as well as your company? And that will help us assign you into breakout rooms. We will get started in just a moment. Okay, I think most of us are here, so it's time to get started. So welcome to our second workshop. Today, we will complete a greenhouse gas practical exercise together. So if you have not downloaded the exercise yet, please do so now. So you would go to the Academy and there should be a link in the chat very soon. So just click that link and then you look at the list on the right-hand side of the screen, and then you would download the first two files. And just a quick note on recording. We are recording this session, but only the general part. So there will be no recording in the breakout rooms as usual. So this is the team. You have met most of us by now. So there is Karolina and myself from Finland, and from Sweden, the team consists of Matthias, Jonna, as well as a new colleague, Albert, who you will be meeting today. And then we have Thomas from Norway, Joachim and Sille from Denmark, and then Ouder from Iceland. But today you will be mostly seeing me and Albert in this workshop.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Sorry, jumping in here just to say hello, and I look forward to working with you and to this session. So a warm welcome.
Yeah, it's great to have you in the team, Albert. So this is the agenda for today. So very soon, David from WSP will introduce the exercise. Then we will move into breakout rooms to complete the exercise together. And then we will come back to this plenary room and David will share the solution and some tips and tricks. And then we also have plenty of time for Q&A, and you can use the chat to post your questions. And also during the Q&A section of this workshop, you can also use the raise hand function. And finally, we will go over the next steps in the program. Just some reminders about our housekeeping rules. So please keep yourself muted when you are not speaking, and please keep your cameras on as much as possible. And if there are two people from your organization, please agree which of you will be the main spokesperson in this meeting. But of course, both of you are welcome to speak and be active if the time allows. And finally, please remember to respect the Chatham House rule. So as a quick recap, you are free to use the information received, but just remember that you should not reveal the identity nor the company of the speakers. And just as a final reminder, please change your name here in Zoom so we can allocate you into breakout rooms. So please make sure that we can see both your name as well as your company name. Thank you. And with that, we will get the workshop started, and I will hand it over to David from WSP. So the floor is yours, David.
Thank you. Thank you, Nella. I just need to try and share my screen. Let's see if I am technically competent. Getting there. Nice to start in the middle of the presentation, which is wonderful. And let me just make it big. There we go. So is that looking correct for everyone?
Perfect.
Super. Thank you. I never know what anybody else is seeing on the other end. So this is a really brief exercise. You hopefully have already got the materials downloaded and have had a chance to have a quick look through it. It just gives a good indication of the things that you should be looking at and addressing when undertaking greenhouse gas accounting, and it tries to cover the sort of some of the issues that you're likely to meet along the way. So we should have been 2 people from WSP today, but unfortunately my colleague Christine is sick from work, so she's at home getting better. So it's just me. I'll try and do my best to cover all the bases. I've been working with climate and sustainability generally for many years, so I have plenty of experience, and hopefully it'll shine through. I'll have a quick introduction to the exercise. As Ned has already said, we'll have the breakout rooms, and then we'll have the solution and QA overview. The timings don't quite match, but that was lack of coordination on the part of Netta and myself. And of course, we take Netta's timing on this, not mine. So let's just jump into the practical exercise. So the whole work is to be done on a fictional company called the Java House Coffee Company. It's a multinational. It roasts and sells packaged coffee beans. It has offices in Toronto, in Canada, and a roasting facility in São Paulo, in Brazil. That's the sort of general sort of frame for what we're looking at. Both facilities purchase electricity from the local grid. The Toronto office also buys renewable energy certificates, so certifying that the electricity they use is from renewable resources. The Toronto office also uses gas for heating, and the Sao Paulo office uses gas to roast the coffee beans. Supplies are sourced in North America. A grinding machine, printing materials. They sell the coffee in bags, so they have to have printed bags to sell the beans in, and the beans. It says the beans here, but they're not. The beans are sourced locally in Brazil. I believe it also says the same in the materials that you'll have downloaded. So the beans are actually sourced in Brazil, not in North America. There's not a lot of coffee bean growing in Canada. The end product is sold in bags. So that's the sort of the overarching framework of what we're going to be looking at. And the task is to calculate scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions for the company for the calendar year that's given. We'll be looking at operational control, and then in the Excel files that hopefully you all have burning away on your desktop, there's a lot of information that you can use to do this calculation. So we have information for fuels, the natural gas used at the office and the roasting facility. Some of the months for the Toronto office are missing, so we have to figure out how to approach that. I'm not going to help you with that now, but I will tell you how to do it later if you can figure it out in the 35 minutes of the exercise, but I'm sure you'll manage. Electricity is used for lighting and other things in the office. We've got the consumption data for that, and the emissions factors for the suppliers, and there's also the renewable energy credits for the consumption in Toronto. The supplies that the company has, some of it is consumable things like printed materials, and some of it is less consumable materials like a big roasting machine. We also have the quantity of coffee purchased. There's a little bit of business travel. Some lucky employees taking some nice trips from Toronto to São Paulo via London. And we have all the information for that. And then there's the actual product. So we know how much coffee is in the bags that are sold and how much each paper bag weighs. So that information should all be in the Excel file. I hope you all have that open now. At the front page, sort of the first tab in the Excel file should be a results summary, and every other tab in the Excel file, so for example, fuels, electricity supplies, business travel, products, contain the information that you need to do the calculation for that component. And then you can put the results from each of those tabs into this results tab here. This just, for example, this is the structure of the tab. You have a quick description at the top. So fuel use, in this case, then you have consumption data for that fuel, and then you have emissions factors. And this is the same for all of the tabs. And all of the information that you need to complete the calculation for greenhouse gases for example, fuel, in this case, is here. The easiest way would just be to do the calculations below the information. But remember, you're trying to do this as a team, so you're going to have to select one person to either do it, or if somebody's really sophisticated, they can do some kind of shared Excel file online. But it's probably easier for one person to do it with a shared screen. And then just copy the result, the final figure that you get for this back to the results tab. A quick tip, which I'm sure you're all very much aware of, is that the emissions are calculated by multiplying the consumption of whatever it is you're looking at by the emissions factor for whatever it is you're looking at. And there's a sneak preview of the solution. I think we're ready now to go into the breakout rooms, Netta. I don't know whether you are going to throw people into them or how it works, but I'll pass the mic over to you.
Thank you. We'll just share some. I will share the slide, and Albert will be taking us through the breakout room best practices. Can you see the slideshow correctly now? Yes.
Yes. All right. So now for the really exciting part, which is the group exercises. So you will be moved into meeting rooms. For those who just joined, please change your name to your correct name so we can assign you correctly. And just a couple, before we move into the breakout rooms, a couple of quick reminders to please assign a group lead to make sure that everyone in the group have equal speaking opportunities and really make this a group exercise. And also remember the quick tips from David as well. And we also need a timekeeper for each group to ensure that you complete the exercise on time. So we'll have 35 minutes in total. And also to remember, if you need any help, you will have a sort of request help button or ask for help button in your in each room to let us know that you need help. Otherwise, you can also go back to this plenary room and ask for help. And also David and us in the Global Compact team will try to be visiting as many rooms as possible. I'm not sure how many rooms there will be, but as we only have 35 minutes, we're not sure we will be able to go to each room. But again, ask for help if you need. All right, I think that's it. Well, let's move on to the breakout rooms for 35 minutes, and best of luck.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for active discussions and completing the exercise. I will hand it over to David and we will go over the solution. So the floor is yours, David.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just try and share my screen again. All right. There we go. Maybe. Yes. Good. I think before I start really quickly, it seemed like there wasn't any like really big problems at all that I encountered when I was jumping through the rooms, but there was some sort of questions that kept coming up, so I'll try and address them as we go through. The The one thing to bear in mind is that for certain bits of it, there's not an absolutely right way of doing it. If you can justify what you've done, then it's probably fine. But we'll get to that at the start. So the first one was the fuels for Scope 1. Here we had the gas use in Toronto and São Paulo, but there was some missing for the Toronto office. Now, one way to do it would be to calculate an average for the winter and an average for the summer, and then apply, for example, the average for the summer to April and September, if you're optimistic, and the average for the winter to October and December and February. That would be certainly one way of doing it. Other people I saw in the groups were also doing just a broad average over the year, which probably gives quite a similar result, to be honest. And if you can justify it, it's not wrong. For example, I think it's fairly unlikely that suddenly goes from 47,000 cubic meters in March to just 725 in April. That seems rather unlikely consumption pattern. But anyway, it gives a final consumption, if you do it this way, of 282,290 cubic meters in Toronto and just under double that in São Paulo. So for calculating the emissions, if we take, let me just move all of your faces away from that side of the screen. The consumption, and for each unit of gas, natural gas that you burn, you'll get a quantity of CO2, a quantity of methane, and a quantity of N2O out of it. And that's slightly different if it's in Canada or Brazil. I can't off the back of my hand tell you why that is. It is probably something to do with either they have included some of the losses in production in the emissions factors, or the actual just the gas is a slightly different composition and it's not entirely pure methane. And then you multiply those by the consumption to get a quantity of CO2, CH4, and N2O, and then you have to multiply those quantities of emitted gas by the global warming potentials to get a final quantity of CO2 equivalents. So in this example, it comes to 1,583 tons of CO2 equivalents from the plants combined. So that's that one. There was quite a few questions around how to calculate the electricity as well, because clearly in the results file, it did give location-based and market-based expectations. So you were expected to calculate location-based emissions and market-based emissions. We have the consumptions for both the office in Toronto and the Brazilian roasting facility. We also know that in Toronto, they purchased 500,000 kilowatt hours of RECs. And we have emissions factors for the two different locations. We have two different types of emissions factors here. We have a grid emission factor, which is just the average of the grid in the locality. So in Canada and in Brazil. But then we also have the residual mix electricity emissions factor. Now, this is the emissions from the grid once you have removed all of the sold RECs within the grid. And that's why it is higher than the emissions factor as just the grid mix average. So to do the calculation for the location based, you take the grid emissions factor which is in kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour, and multiply it by the electricity purchased. And that's pretty straightforward. For Toronto and Sao Paulo, you get those results. Now, for the market-based, you take the residual mix emissions factor and multiply it by the electricity purchased minus the renewable energy certificates purchased. And in the case of Toronto, that gives a quite significant reduction. In the case of Sao Paulo, it gives an increase. And what you can see here, which must really, really annoy the company, is that despite the fact they've bought 500,000 kilowatt hours of renewable energy certificates, the result on their market-based calculation is that they actually emit more CO2 equivalents. And I think this highlights a really important part of this greenhouse gas work when you're working with these calculations, that they are an abstraction because they haven't done anything different. They've just looked at two different methods and come up with two different answers. One 144 tons of CO2 equivalent, one 149 tons of CO2 equivalent. And even in the 149 tons, they've also spent more money to buy renewable energy. And still it looks like they've emitted more emissions. The reality is that they haven't done anything different in either situation, and they will have emitted some emissions somewhere between or slightly below or slightly above that calculated amount. But because we have these accounting methodologies, that's what we stick to and that's what we do. Yes, let's go on to the next one. It's slightly less annoying. Purchase goods and services and capital goods. So we have a grinding machine and printing services where we have a spend data on it, and coffee beans where we have a quantity in kilograms data. We have emissions factors for spend within two different categories. We have for machinery and for printing. And we have a coffee farming emissions factor for coffee beans in kilograms. So we just quite simply multiply them together and get the results there. Coffee beans are considerably higher than the others. And when you allocate them to purchase goods and the categories within scope 3, so purchase goods and services, that is the printing service and the coffee beans. You put them together, so that's 304 tons. And the capital goods, it should actually just be capital goods, I believe, is the grinding machine. That's something that you would expect to last for several years. So that is in that category, 2 tons. Business travel. Here they're just talking about one flight from London to Toronto, and Sao Paulo to Toronto. Okay, it's 2 flights. I guess it's a return. And what we have here is each of these flights is over 2 legs, so a long distance leg and a short distance leg. And the emissions factors that we have for travel emissions are divided into short, medium, and long. So we have 2 long haul and 2 medium haul flights. We also have emissions factors, global warming potentials, and very importantly, we have the conversion factor between kilometers and miles, because the emissions factors we have are in miles and the distances we have are in kilometers. So when we begin to put things together, we have now everything in miles, so it fits the same as the emissions factors. And then we have the total distance. For short haul, there's no. For medium haul, there is 630 miles. And for long haul, 8,978 miles. And using the emissions factor and the global warming potentials, we come to a total of 2.83 tons, which seems suspiciously low, I have to be honest. Total sales, this is the end of life of products. So there's not actually that much to be done here. The products are pretty basic. It's a bag full of coffee beans. So the waste from that will be packaging waste, the coffee bags, and the coffee grinds. And for each packet they sell, there's 3 grams of bag and 450 grams of coffee grinds. They sell 500,000. So that gives a total of 1.5 tons and 250 tons, respectively. We have some emissions factors for waste treatment, mixed paper recycling, and for food waste in landfill. Bear in mind that this is in Canada and not in the Nordic countries, and it's from 2021, not from 2024. So if you were looking at food waste in the Nordic countries, you wouldn't apply a landfill disposal method, because that's not where food waste goes in the Nordic countries. And then you get a final calculation to give the total tons of CO2 equivalent. And you'll see it's quite a lot. The food waste in particular is a significant amount of emissions. And that's tons of CO2 equivalent. And I should point out that almost all of that is methane. There might be a very, very little quantity related to moving the waste from one location to the other, but most of it will be methane generated in a landfill. So then we have the final results. Stationary combustion, that was the gas. Scope 2 emissions, the market-based and the location-based. The Scope 3 emissions, purchased goods and services, capital goods and services, business travel, and end-of-life treatment of products. And then we add them all together at the end there. So that was a quick, I can't actually see anybody. I was going to say a quick show of hands, how many people got to the end and got the right result. But I can't really, I could only see 5 of you at the time. So I can't really ask you for a show of hands. But before we go into questions and answers, although feel free to, in the chat or in the video, put your hand up, and then one of my colleagues will interrupt me and let me answer your question. I just can't monitor the chat and speak at the same time. I'm just going to run through a few of the quick takeaways from this exercise, and then we can get straight into the Q&A. Natural gas quantities must be estimated for the months with missing data. That's common issue. Probably not if you're only dealing with your own headquarters, but if you're dealing with multiple sites, there could well be, especially in the first year or two where you're trying to set up greenhouse gas emissions calculations, that one or more facilities won't have the most complete data. And when you're doing any estimated covering, it is worth bearing in mind the different types of consumption you're likely to get over the year. For electricity, always be very aware of the emissions factor you're using for doing the location and the market-based calculation. It's best and recommended to do both, so that you are as transparent as possible in your greenhouse gas reporting. And always remember that the residual mix emissions factor is going to be higher than the grid average, and that can mean that your emissions, despite having bought renewable energy certificates are actually higher. For purchase goods and capital services, it's pretty self-explanatory. The grinding machine is clearly a capital good that should be reported in Scope 3, Category 2, capital goods, and the others are kind of consumables. There are things that flow through your company and should be reported in Scope 3, Category 1, purchase goods and services. There was different calculation approaches here in the example as well. So we have a mass-based approach where we had some, in the case of the coffee beans, we had a quantity of beans, and then we had a spend-based approach. Realistically, mass-based or is best, but you may also, as an alternative to mass-based, you may also find specific, for example, for the grinding machine, you may be able to get an EPD or other similar product environmental footprint documentation from the manufacturer that gives you an actual figure for the emissions for that machine, rather than trying to calculate it through a proxy like a spend-based emissions factor. Business travel, the miles versus kilometers it can be a stumbling block, but only if you're really using factors generated in the US. Even the UK now, you'll find that most factors are in kilometers. In case of the flights, the emissions factors are based on flight length, so it's important to break them down if you have multi-stops on your flight. But it might also be easier, depending on how you want to do it, to use the carbon emissions calculator from the ICAO, which is really easy. You put your start and end point in, and it gives you a really detailed, really accurate emissions from that flight, and it's based on really specific data for the routes that you use, and the types of plane that you use, and the class of seat that you choose, for example. So it's probably, all things equal, easier. It also has an API, so if you're a larger company that has a lot of flights, you can actually just plug directly into it and use your own internal data on the flights that you take to automatically calculate all of your business travel emissions. And then end of life products, end of life of the sold product, sorry. You need to look at the type of material that's coming out and what it's likely to go to as a disposal method. That'll probably vary in the Nordic countries. So be aware of the location that this is taking place in. If you have multiple, if you have activities or facilities across, for example, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, or Denmark, Poland, and India, then the disposal method will be different in each case. So you need to have a specific emissions factor for that. And I was thinking that there's some things that are clearly missing here. When we look at all of the scopes, the categories within Scope 3, for example, there's no internal logistics. They roast beans in Sao Paulo, but their grinding is in Toronto. So unless they have a magic carpet, they're using some kind of emissions to get, or some kind of transport to get the beans from Sao Paulo to Toronto. So that if this was your first year reporting, next year you might be looking at, okay, how can we improve this reporting? One thing would be to include the internal logistics for moving stuff around. There's also no employee commuting included. I would assume that if it's an office in Toronto, they have some workers in that office, and they will commute. And same in Sao Paulo, in the roasting facility, we would expect there's some people to be working there and moving from home to work. So that would be another way of improving this this overall greenhouse gas emissions calculation. And there's probably several more. The more you dig deeper into it, you can always improve. And when you do improve the calculations year on year, it's very important to be clear about what you have improved, and also be clear about how that affects any targets and base years that you may have calculated and set. And that was it for the solution. I hope everybody managed to follow through. I hope that most of you managed to get through the exercise in your groups, but please feel free now to ask any questions on this or any other subject.
Thanks, David. We have quite a few questions in the comment field or in the chat, so maybe you want to address those, and people, please open your mic if you want to voice over your question or provide some more details. But we have the first one from Misha. What credible sources are available for spend-based emission factors? You also have it in the chat, David.
There's a good question. There's quite a lot of sources. Whether they're credible or not is a good question. How do I'd like to stop sharing this screen. That's probably the easiest way is to press stop sharing. We have in the previous not workshop session for both the advanced and the beginners, we had a slide with links to a lot of different databases for emissions factors. The UK DEFRA publishes an annual emissions factor, which is actually pretty good. Not a single emissions factor, a huge database of emissions factors, which includes some spend-based emissions for things like office work and hotel stays and this kind of thing. So that's a good starting point and see if there's anything there. The good thing about that is that it is updated every year. It's really comprehensive, and there's some pretty bulletproof work behind it. And it's something that most UK companies use as their absolute standard go-to for emissions factors. So it's also got a lot of sort of industry backing in that way. The greenhouse gas protocol itself has a large, it's not a database of databases, but it's like a large list of different databases and sources for emissions factors. And it's worth checking that out as well as a good sort of point of departure. I hope that helps, Misha. It's very difficult to point to anything in particular. I think it's also worth pointing out that spend-based emissions factors are never really that great. They work at a very aggregated level. And that is just what it is. It's what you use if you can't get anything better.
Thanks, David. We also have a question from Mikko. Should Scope 3 include emissions from the production of natural gas?
Yes, in principle, yes. In the energy services one, I think it's category 1. No, it's not category 1. What category is it? 3 or 4. But it's very important to be aware whether the emissions factor you use and apply in Scope 1 has already included losses from production and transmission in that emissions factor. So yes, in principle, but it might already be that you've included it in Scope 1 without knowing it.
All right, thanks. We also have a question from Tove. Is there more examples like this for different sectors? So I guess you refer to the exercise example for today.
Yes.
Thanks.
Oh, good question. I don't know, actually. I don't know if anybody at the Climate Ambition Accelerator knows if there's any specific examples within the learning portal there.
It's just good to, you know, to see, I mean, to only to follow the Excel and how you do the calculations. You can learn a lot because you see exactly how the calculations are made in Excel. So if there's more examples with different sectors, that would be really easy just to go in and see in the Excel how the calculation has been done.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, do we have this, at least the solution Excel file available, Netta? I know
Yes.
this would only be for this example, of course, but
Yeah, I mean, you can download the solution from Academy, so it's one of the last slides or like last files. The first two were the exercise, and then you also have the solution. But as far as I'm aware, I don't think we have more of these exercises for different sectors, but I can ask from my colleagues and we'll get back to you if there would be any other examples like this.
Thank you. That would be really beneficial.
I think in some of the GHG protocol documents, there are some examples, but they're not presented like this. They're just sort of on paper and a brief discussion. And I think it seems like what you really appreciate with this would be that you can actually literally follow Excel sheet, sort of cell to cell, and see how the
Yeah,
whole thing is
I
put
mean,
together like Lego.
yes, there was when we did the example, the workshop here, and I asked for, you know, can you please share the Excel, because I don't really understand everything, but I know if I got the Excel, I will understand, because then I can follow how the calculation has been done. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Perfect. We also have a question from Lily. Are market-based and location-based factors for Scope 2 the same if you don't buy any renewable energy certificates?
And can I also continue a bit on this?
Go ahead.
Because I'm not sure if we went through Ina's question. That was, I think, one of the first questions, which was kind of related to this, is that in Brazil there is no REX purchase, so why location and market-based not the same? So why do we adjust also for all the other markets this this kind of market-based methodology if we are not buying the REX there? Because that seems very against the idea that we would like to promote green investments, but then you're actually punishing companies that operate globally, and they are kind of investing somewhere but not everywhere, but then you have to calculate everywhere this kind of with the worse emission factors.
Good question. I'm not sure if there is a REX market in Brazil. There may be, there may not be. But not buying into it is what can I say? I kind of tried to address this a little bit in the slide on the solution there, kind of indicating that both of these methods are really an abstraction. And all of the emissions calculations in some way or another are an abstraction. And that is what it is. The logic behind it is quite sound. If you are looking at a location, then the energy use from that location, regardless of whether they bought REX or not, is related to the average grid emissions. Because there is a market for renewable energy certificates, they have introduced the market based emissions calculation alongside the location based to give impetus to actually participate in the market. And in if you only are working in one location or within one grid, that's always going to give a positive payback. But where you are operating on two different grids and only purchasing renewable energy certificates in the one, then it can in the case of the example, give a bit of a backhanded slap for for your seemingly good, well-intentioned investment.
Yeah, or like the calculation I'm doing, we're operating in 40 different grids. So it's kind of, it takes, it kind of removes the incentive to invest in green electricity anywhere if we don't do it everywhere.
Yeah, it's I don't know whether you call it a feature or a bug, but it's not a, it can disincentivize behaviors. I can certainly see that. And in some locations there won't be any market for RECs, so then it's just the same.
Yeah. Okay.
I can't also honestly say that I know that these emissions factors are correct that are used in the example. So that's another factor to bear in mind. I mean, this is an example of how to do it, not necessarily that the emissions factors are bang on.
Yeah. But how about then, I guess that my second question was that if there is no RECs purchased by the company, do you then use just the kind of the grid emission factor to calculate both market-based and location-based? Because, for example, ESRS, you have to report both.
Yeah, no, if you're you have to use the correct emissions factor. So if for market-based, you have to use the residual grid emissions factor, regardless of whether you have bought renewable energy certificates or not. Because the whole point is that one is reflecting the physical reality of what's happening in a location. The other is reflecting what your money is being spent on. And if you're operating in a place where there is renewable energy certificates, but you're not buying them, then your money has been spent on the electricity that's left over. If you see what I mean.
Yes, okay, but then that's kind of the incentive. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
We also have a raised hand from you, Ivan. Please go ahead.
Yes, and I want to react on this brief discussion. It is about this particular case. So if there is provided residual emission factor or residual mixed emission factor, then it implicates that there is existing a possibility to buy renewable electricity, which is credible. Yes. So, so of course, for the exercise purpose, this makes sense, but I'm not aware that, for example, in Brazil is such a scheme established. So in such a case, I think that for the market where we do not have the credible schemes, we anyhow are we can only use the location-based factors because anything else is available. So we do not have basically residual mix factors available.
Yeah, if there's no market and no factors, then you could credibly use what is available. And if that's location-based, it is. Just be quite transparent about what you're using. And why you're using it.
Yeah, exactly. But this is kind of the strategy is expecting in this kind of the use case or in this example that there is kind of the indirect expectation that it is possible to buy credible credits basically in Brazil as well. What is not matching the reality at the moment, as far as I know.
Yeah, that absolutely could be the case. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
No problem.
I'm also jumping ahead to Tove had a question, follow-up question to your previous answer. What did you mean by saying that emission factors are only good if you don't have anything else?
I mean, spend-based emissions factors are a sort of last resort in most cases. So they're the best. Like I said, the whole task is an abstraction in some way, and so the closer you can get to reality, the better. And a spend-based emissions factor is quite a large abstraction from reality. It doesn't really look at what you're spending the money on. It gives an approximate within a sector. The sectors as a whole has this much revenue flowing through it, and is associated with this much GHG emissions. So if you spend money in this sector, on average, it'll be related to this much this amount of GHG emissions, which is fine, but there's a huge difference within sectors. It makes a difference if you are buying, I don't know, I'm totally grasping at straws now, a machine made of aluminium or a machine made of steel, for example. There's a factor of 10 difference in emissions from steel and aluminium. So yes, you could have a spend-based emissions for machines within the industrial sector, but it would be better to go to the manufacturer of that machine and say, hey, how much emissions are related to the manufacturer of this machine? And then get an actual figure rather than having to calculate the figure based on how much you've spent on it and some average emissions factor. I don't know if that helps.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Perfect. We also have a question from Sophia. Let's see. A great challenge for us is transport that we do not pay. How do we find data and emission factors? I'm not sure if you want to voice over that, Sophia, to provide some more details.
I can get from our transport companies that we buy from, that we pay, I can get reports on even emissions. I don't need to calculate. But when it comes to when we sell products and we have no control over what are the distributors, we probably know who they are, but how to find and how to just to find data where everything goes and how much where they spend emission factors or
is it for sort of logistic transport, you mean, for the products from your gate or distribution to the shop, or
it's yes, from
business,
our factory to our customers. And we produce parts to machines, so it's not an end user, but
okay. Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be easy, straight up, but I don't know how many manufacturers you sell to, or whether it goes through a second layer. So if there's a trader in the middle, or if it's directly from you to a customer, then you can normally, and you probably will know if it's going by ship for some of the way, or if it's going by road or going by rail. So then you can normally get, or there are certainly available, emissions per ton kilometer for these different transport types. And if you know the location of your customers, then, and you know the approximate weight of what you're sending to them, you could do it like that. It's a bit of a pain, but
I wish you had another answer.
sorry.
But so it's ton kilometer. There's a lot of calculating to do.
Yeah, I mean, you might be able to aggregate it all into something. I don't know. I don't know if they're all local or within the Nordic countries or where you're sending them, but of course, the further away you send them, the more complicated it gets.
But when it comes to the SBTI, will that be enough? Or will I have to calculate on transports from where the machine then is put together to the consumer as well? Because then we don't know where the consumers are.
I would take it to that second point.
Tier
I think
one customer.
Yeah, that would be my because you just don't know beyond that. And it's kind of fine to try and make the effort to trace things as far as you can, but you very quickly introduce things that are simply unknown, and then it just becomes a pointless exercise because you're just making up numbers in the end. Which is hopeless for any target setting or then any initiative to reduce emissions.
Okay, and it's very difficult for us to have any impact on
absolutely
further steps.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope that helps.
So we still have like 5 minutes left, so we can take a couple more questions. At least there's one raised hand from Ina. Do you want to open your
Yes,
mic?
just this is a case that actually was presented to me a few weeks ago. So the case is that we are a company that mostly our core business is transportation of goods. We can summarize it like this. And one location we kind of provide is, say, additional service when we allow some electrical boats to charge at our location. And they pay us back for this electricity they use. So I would argue that those emissions would probably be reported in scope 3 use of sold products, because in this case, we act like an electricity provider and not direct emissions. Do you agree with that, given that that's not our core business?
Let me try and figure out, so I make sure I understand what's happening.
So we have our location and let's say our warehouse, and we allow the one client to kind of, or we have this, let's say, ad hoc agreement with one client to kind of charge an electric boat there, but that's not our main business. So we were arguing whether those kind of emissions from the consumption of electricity should be reported in our scope 2. I will argue that should be reported in scope 3, because we don't consume the electricity, it's consumed by someone else, and we kind of sell it.
Do you sell it to cost price, or do you sell it as a profit?
I think it will be cost price.
Yeah, I would just remove those emissions, that consumption from everywhere. There's nothing to do with you.
So because we bought the electricity from the provider, but we kind of pass it on.
Yeah, I would remove it. It's only, it's not your consumption. It's not, I mean, it's sometimes in these instances, it's worth sort of turning the dial up to 11 and saying, okay, does that make sense still?
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, imagine a huge cruise liner turning up, or something absolutely ginormous coming and using electricity through your plug.
Yeah,
that they're essentially just paying you're a middleman in this transaction. That would then be all of your emissions. Everything else in your emissions accounting would be minute. So then it makes no sense.
It's just a minor thing, but just in case for us to be able to have everything in our inventory. Okay, so you wouldn't, let's say, allocate either in scope 3 use of sold products?
No, I mean, if you want to, just for the sake of transparency, you can make a little sort of addendum to the reporting to say we also have a vendor that charges their transport vehicle through our socket.
Okay.
And that has been removed from our greenhouse gas emissions because it's got nothing to do with us.
Okay.
I think that would be fine.
Thank you.
I think we have time for 2 quick questions, Netta, right? Because we have last 2 ones in the chat. We have one from Desi. I'm going to shorten it a bit. Is it possible to apply our scope 4 calculation to reach net zero?
Oh, that's beyond my knowledge, I'm afraid, Desi. So I don't know.
Okay. Thank you for trying.
You can see if we can revisit that down the line. And we have one last one, I think, also. Is there an example for category 5 waste generated in operations for this case we work with?
No, there isn't, but there probably would. There should be. There's almost certainly waste in the roasting facility. That's not included, but could be. This would be another case of improving the reporting the following year. It's probably waste from the office as well, a little bit, especially if they have a canteen, for example. But yeah, that would be where you could improve the reporting. And there are quite a lot of areas where the reporting in this example could be improved.
All right, thanks, David, and thanks everyone for excellent questions. Back to you, Netta.
Can I just say one thing, Desi? if you put, what we'll do is we'll try and we'll put this question into our big questions Excel file, and then I'll try and answer, provide a written answer as soon as possible. I just can't answer it off the top of my head.
Okay, but that would be great. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Yeah, and sorry, we had a question from Minna. I think is it okay? Maybe David, could you check the chat to catch that question, and maybe we can move on, because I'm not sure how much time we have, Netta, but maybe we need to move on. But if you could reply to that in the chat, David, that would be great. Thanks.
Yes, I'll do what I can. Good.
And I'm actually the next one up. So I think you can move to the next slide already, Netta. Thanks. All right, but thanks everyone for great discussions, fantastic questions, and for David, thank you for your support today and also replying to all those questions. And we'll try to get back to you if we couldn't sort of reply to you properly today. However, let's look at the next steps in the program. So our next workshop is about near-term science-based targets. And this is exactly 2 weeks from now, so on Thursday, 26th of December. However, we do have a deadline for you next week, so in 1 week on the 18th, and that is to please send us your SBT-related questions by end of that day on the 18th of September. And we'll follow up with an email and everything, so and you will be able to find this, of course. We also, you're also welcome to study all these topics, of course. You find a lot of courses on Academy, in the Academy Learning Path. You can see some of these blue courses here. They are quite useful. And we have also provided questions that you posted last time in the Q&A sheet, FYI, so you can have a look there as well. So thanks a lot, David, for providing those answers. Also, last thing is that we will be sending you a feedback survey again for this session. So please let us know if there is something we did well or something we could improve. That's always very useful for us to, that feedback is super useful for us to, make amendments and improve this accelerator. So thanks a lot, and back to you, Netta.
Thanks, Albert. So that is for today. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, David, for your insights and the solution. So we will see you in exactly 2 weeks when we will delve into setting science-based targets. So that's all for today. So here you can still see our contact details if you have any questions for us. So feel free to reach out. But that is it.